Good morning. We are live from Steepleview Farm this beautiful August morning. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to just start off by saying today, thank you for joining us at our new hour, 8:30 a.m. instead of the 11:30 hour. As the summer progressed and 11:30 started to creep into the time that we needed to be in the garden, I thought, well, you know what? Times are changing. Daylight's getting a little bit shorter. People are getting up a little bit later, maybe. I don't know about you, but I still get up early. People are getting up a little bit later, maybe. So 8:30 in the morning, might catch a few early risers, people with a cup of coffee. Join us for the show. Thanks for being here today. We want to talk with you about canning and preserving food coming up here in a couple of minutes. For those of you who haven't started this process of canning and preserving food, it's a wonderful journey. It's a wonderful learning experience. There's a lot to learn. I mean, just between equipment and recipes and how to do it, with their resources out there. We're going to talk about all those things coming up. But as we always do first thing on Saturday mornings, let's look outside like all farmers do and wonder, what's the weather going to do in my neck of the woods? Well, it looks like we're going to get a little rain today and then some pretty nice weather the rest of the week. A little warm weather, that's good for those of you who've started some autumn crops, some fall crops, some winter plantings in your garden. That warm weather is going to help that germination. Now, it's not going to be too good for your spinach. Spinach doesn't germinate well above 70 degrees, but there's an easy way to fix that. If you're going to try and germinate spinach and you see the temperatures climbing into the 80s and the 90s, water it more often. Just put some water on it. That water will cool down the soil, slow down the heat that's going to hit those seeds. Water it a couple times a day. Let the evaporation from the soil do the same thing that it does in your air conditioner. Let it cool that soil down 2 or 3 times a day. Just water the soil. You'll lower the temperature of the soil a little bit. That will help you when you're trying to germinate some of these cold season crops like spinach. But the weather this week doesn't look all that bad. Rain at the end of the week. Well, what are we going to do today? Are we going to be able to get out in the garden and plant? Let's check the Old Farmer's Almanac. Look at this. Yesterday and today, the 23rd and the 24th, the next couple of days, 3 days, great days for planting. Now's the time to get out there and get those seeds in the ground. You know, we talked last weekend about the daylight, the Paris phone. We talked about how you've got to have 10 hours of daylight to get things to grow. We talked about how if you're going to plant late fall, winter crops, you got to get them up and get them established before that frost comes. This week looks like a great week to do that. We're going to have some good weather. The ground's going to be moist. If you go out and plant today or tomorrow, you're going to get some rain, some warm temperatures to help with that germination. Looks like a great week to do some planting. And if you've got time, now is the time to start thinking about putting up some of that food. You know, tomato season comes and goes so quickly. Everybody's like so anxious for fresh tomatoes. And then they come and people are so disconnected from the source of their food that they don't realize it's over. I mean, it's over in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. Yes, indeterminate tomatoes, which we've talked about before, will continue to grow throughout the season. Some people will have determinate tomatoes that'll continue to produce for 3 or 4 weeks. But by and large, your tomatoes are going to start around the 4th of July, and they're going to be over by the end of August. That doesn't sound like a long period of time. People see tomatoes for sale at farmers markets and at roadside stands, and they think, oh, there's an abundance of tomatoes. You're used to seeing tomatoes in the grocery store. Vine-ripened, field-ripened tomatoes, folks, are going to be over with very soon. But that doesn't mean you've got to wait until next July. If you want to have the flavor of vine-ripened, field-ripened tomatoes all winter long, you should consider preserving them. Now, there are a lot of ways to preserve vegetables. You can preserve vegetables using the oldest method known to mankind, fermentation. We talked a little bit about that last week when it came to talking about sauerkraut, how you can use the natural yeast that exists in the atmosphere and on the surface of most vegetables to take fresh cabbage, a little salt. The salt is designed to help remove the water from the cabbage. At the same time, the salt also helps to fight off some of the bad bacteria, while the good yeast ferments the crop. Fermentation is a process that's been around for many, many thousand years. It is the oldest form of food preservation known to mankind. But there are modern methods out there for preserving foods, and some foods I think taste better if they're not fermented, such as vine-ripened tomatoes. Now, there are a lot of different ways to make tomatoes. Where I live, in my part of the country, everybody down here makes what they call tomato juice. They take their tomatoes, they cook them, they crush them, they run them through a food mill, they take the seeds out, they take the skins out, and they make a jar of tomato juice. It's quite a liquidy kind of can of vegetables. The juice itself isn't thick like tomato sauce, certainly not as thick as tomato paste. It really is more like the thickness of a V8 or something like that. But tomato juice can be cooked down. It can be made into sauces, put into soups. It can be used all winter long. I prefer to have hot pack or cold pack tomatoes. And that's a process of taking fresh vine-ripened tomatoes, not overripe, not damaged tomatoes, but vine-ripened tomatoes, and have those tomatoes available in a quantity necessary to fill a canner. Now, we're going to talk about a couple of different kinds of canners here in a minute. We're going to talk about pressure canning. I know the big, scary pressure canner. A lot of people are afraid of them, don't know how to use them. If you use them according to the manufacturer's instructions, they are not only perfectly safe, but they are much safer. They are much safer than some of the ways that people used to can. The way your grandma or great-grandma used to can, you might want to rethink those methods. Sure, they might have worked. They might have been safe. But modern science has discovered that the botulism can live and be undetected in some of those old canning methods, whereas the modern pressure canning method is the best way to ensure that you've got a safe, shelf-safe product for the winter and actually for a couple of years. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But when you're talking about doing tomatoes, and Lucy, I see you say your tomatoes are ripening slowly. I've heard that from a lot of people so far this year, that tomatoes are ripening slowly in some gardens. In our garden, ours came on all at once just in time. We've actually harvested, I think, about 8,000 pounds of tomatoes so far. We've probably got another 800 to 1,000 pounds to harvest. Then our indeterminate heirloom tomatoes will continue to produce for a while, and we'll still have slicers, but our canning tomatoes are pretty much done for. Well, when you go to get tomatoes to do canning, how many tomatoes do you need? How much do you have to have? How many jars of tomatoes are you going to get out of a pound or a couple of pounds? Well, here's a little simple math for you. There are about 53 pounds of tomatoes in a bushel. Now, 1 bushel of fresh tomatoes at 53 pounds yields about 18 quarts of canned tomatoes. Now, for those of you who are accustomed to canning, you know that a canner load is 7 quarts. A canner load is 9 pints. So when you're looking at trying to decide how many tomatoes you need to make jars of tomatoes to put in your basement to enjoy all winter long, what you need to realize is that you have 53 pounds as a bushel. That's going to yield 18 quarts. That's a little more than 2 canner loads, or 15 to 18 quarts of juice. Why is it going to make less in the way of juice? Once you crush the tomatoes, you remove the volume. So you've got fewer tomatoes in the jar if all you're putting in is the juice. If you remove the pulp, you remove the seeds, you remove the skins, you'll have fewer jars out of the same amount of tomatoes. So a bushel of tomatoes. Now, let me give you a suggestion. You can buy tomatoes pretty much anywhere you want. Here at Steepleview Farm, we sell tomatoes in 2 grades. Now, a lot of people grade them in multiple grades. We grade them in 2 grades. Number ones are the pretty ones. They're the ones that you want to see. The big round red ones or the big round yellow ones. They're great for slicing. They're great for serving. They're great for eating fresh. But the ones you want for canning are going to come a lot cheaper than the big pretty number ones. You want canners. Canners are typically going to sell for about half the price of the slicers, of the pretty ones. Be sure you select canners that are disease-free. You don't want dimples, you don't want holes, you don't want splits, you don't want juice coming out, you don't want something that's got a pathogen in it already. Select good, firm, ripe canners for your juice or your canned tomatoes. Now, how do you can tomatoes? A lot of different recipes out there. I'm going to just tell you the one that I like. And I'm going to be doing this live today here at Steepleview Farm at our produce station. So if you're interested in getting canners to can yourself, you want to know a little bit more about canning, today'd be a nice day to stop down at the farm, come by the produce station. I'm going to be canning because I have to man the produce station, and I'm going to be canning while I'm doing it. So it's all going to be going on at the same time. But you scald your tomatoes in boiling water for about 30 to 45 seconds. The skins will split. Put them in cold water. The skins will then slip off. Then you need to core the tomato. By coring the tomato, you want to cut out the stem end, and you want to cut out that little tough white spot just below the stem end of the tomato. I like to take my tomatoes and put them in a pot and boil them a little. Bring them to a boil until they start to lose their juice. There's a reason for that. If you cut them up and put them in a pot in quarters or less than quarters, you'll eliminate what's called separation. That is, when you put your tomatoes in a jar and you process them, put them on the shelf, they separate. You got a little water at the bottom and the rest of the tomatoes are floating above that. People don't like the way that looks. If you're going to enter your tomatoes in the county fair, you might want to worry about that, but it doesn't change anything. It's all fine. But if you want to eliminate that separation, chop your tomatoes up finer, put them in a pot, bring them to a boil before you pack your jars. Or you can just pack your jars with the scalded tomatoes after they've been skinned and the cores removed. Pack your jars tightly, push them down until enough juice comes out to cover the tomatoes. Add a little salt, the recipe I'll show you here in a minute. Add 2 tablespoons per quart of lemon juice. Why? Tomatoes are a low acid food. Acid from lemon juice preserves them, helps to cut down on bacteria development, even though you're going to process your tomatoes in a canner. So that's my typical recipe, although there are a lot of other recipes out there. Now, I also want to talk with you briefly, we're going to get back into canning in a minute, but briefly about what you might think about doing this time of the year. Most farm markets, most farm stands are going to have an abundance of cucumbers this time of the year. Cucumbers are a great product to can. You say, well, how do I can cucumbers? Well, canned cucumbers are called pickles. You can either do lactofermentation, which if you want to reach out to me, I'll give you some recipes on how to ferment cucumbers in their natural juices, or you can go to the store and you can buy Mrs. Wage's spices for pickling. Now, I'll have to tell you right now, I think canning supplies and pickling spices, Mrs. Wage's, I think that stuff is a little scarce right now. I'm told that there are a lot of people who can't find canning supplies, jars, lids, and other things. Cucumbers are still available. There are recipes that we can give you for refrigerator pickles. Requires no canning. They have to be eaten more quickly, but they're vinegar based. So you get spices mixed with vinegar and you can make pickles. Well, how many cucumbers do you need to make a load of pickles? Well, a bushel of cucumbers equals about 16 to 24 quarts. So a bushel, one bushel, 48 pounds, 16 to 24 quarts, about 2 pounds per quart. 14 pounds is equal to a canner load of 7 quarts. 9 pounds is equal to a canner load of 9 pints. Now, preparing cucumbers for pickling is pretty important. It's kind of important to actually not only wash the cucumbers, but I recommend cutting off the blossom end. The blossom end contains enzymes that can make your pickles a little less crisp. I also think it's okay to add a little pickle crisp to your pickles. I've tried a variety of techniques. I've used grape leaves. I've used oak leaves. I've used the natural methods to add tannins and to make the pickles crisp. I actually find that Ball's Pickle Crisp is a safe, food safe ingredient. If you go look at a jar of pickles anywhere in the grocery store, they've got pickle crisp in them. But the first thing I would recommend you do is get fresh cucumbers. If you're going to make pickles, fresh cucumbers make a big difference. Cucumbers begin to deteriorate a little bit right after they're picked. The enzymes in the blossom end continue to try and ripen that cucumber up. Why do they ripen? Why do fruits ripen? They ripen so that they become flexible enough for the seeds to come out and make it to the soil. They actually kind of rot a little bit. Ripening turns to rot. Rot turns to letting seeds out. Letting seeds out turns into propagating more plants. You want to get the cucumbers as fresh as possible. If you're going to pickle them, it'll make them crisper. Slice off a little bit of the blossom end. That's the opposite end of the stem end. Slice off a little of the blossom end to eliminate some of those enzymes that are going to continue to work in that cucumber. Also highly recommend getting a cooler, filling it about a third of the way with ice, another third of the way with water, and leaving enough room, another third of the cooler, to put your cucumbers in. Submerge them in water and pickle them when they are ice cold. Increases their crispness. So when you're pickling, or you're making tomato juice, or you're canning green beans, or you're canning corn, or anything else, it's always a good idea, in my opinion, to read the information that's available out there, because you're actually putting up a product that has the potential to develop pathogens that are invisible. You can't smell them, you can't see them, but they can hurt you very badly, botulism being one of them. Don't be afraid. Don't let that stop you. Don't say, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm afraid of getting sick. I don't want to have canned goods that are going to have botulism in them. It's not that hard to prevent. Just follow the instructions. I would recommend that you follow the instructions at a publication made by the University of Kentucky called Home Canning Vegetables. Just use the website UKY. Just put UKY, put Home Canning UKY, University of Kentucky, UKY, in your search bar, and you'll find this very interesting and helpful publication on how to can vegetables in Kentucky. It will provide you step-by-step guides and recipes on how to prepare your vegetables, how to prepare your jars, how to prepare your lids, your rings, what the temperature should be, how you cover them, how you can them, how you cool them. Everything you need to know is in that guide. Just Google UKY and a space canning vegetables, and you'll bring up a whole bunch of PDFs, a whole bunch of documents published by the University of Kentucky. These are tested by the Food Safety Division at the Agriculture Department as well, and they're safe methods for canning. Also, I would recommend, highly recommend, that you find yourself a suitable canner that you can learn to use. Now, most of you have probably seen the old canner that your grandma used, the old water bath canner. They're available pretty much everywhere if they're in stock right now. The water bath canner is just a big pot. It's got a basket in it with handles that hang on the side that allows you to lower your jars into the water or lift your jars out of the water to retrieve them so that you're not putting your hand or even an oven mitt hand into boiling water. A canner of this sort, a water bath canner, is safe for some vegetables. Even according to the Department of Agriculture and the University of Kentucky, it's safe for canning tomatoes or making tomato juice or making canned whole tomatoes because you're going to acidify them. You're going to add lemon juice to them. Some vegetables, however, such as green beans, you just really can't do those in a water bath canner. What you really need for those is a pressure canner. Now, don't be afraid. This is a picture of a pressure canner. If you look at the pressure canner, there are a couple of things that you'll notice on the top. One you probably can't see very well, but I'll try and help you find it. On the top of the pressure canner, you see a gauge. When you're pressure canning, you're going to put this over the fire with a little bit of water in it and your canned goods in it, sealed up appropriately. And you're going to bring that temperature up to the recommended temperature for your vegetables. That pressure gauge will then sit at that temperature and you adjust your heat and keep it adjusted at that heat so that while it's cooking, while it's in there, the temperature stays at the recommended place on the gauge. Not hard to do. Once it gets to a certain temperature, it's pretty much going to stay there anyhow. It's not likely to drop much or go much above that. But if you're afraid of it going above that, to the right of that gauge, you'll see a little black knob with some chrome below it. That's a wobbler. As the steam escapes through a little port under that wobbler, it bounces back and forth and allows the steam to escape at a controlled pace. On the front of the canner, you can see very close to the front rim, you see another little device. That's just a lid lock. That will pop up when the canner gets to a certain temperature and lock the lid in place. Now, if you look behind the gauge on the lid of the canner in the back, you might be able to make out just a little bit of a black bump back there. That little black bump is actually a safety relief valve. The point is, if this canner should by any chance be neglected, you walk away, you leave the fire up too high, and it's going to get to a high enough pressure, that little relief valve is just a little rubber plug or silicone plug, and it pops out, opens up a hole, releases the pressure, makes the canner perfectly safe. Maybe somebody scared you about pressure canners a long time ago. Maybe you're just afraid to try them. I've been pressure canning for 30 years. It's perfectly safe. I started with an old pressure canner that we got from my wife's grandmother. It was started to get hard to find seals to go around the lid for it. And so we got a new one. The one we got is just like the one that you see in this picture. I believe it's made by Mirror. That's the manufacturer. They're available pretty much online and in other stores everywhere. Pressure canning is designed to create a higher temperature inside the canner than you can get by boiling water. Boiling water at sea level, the temperature of the water gets up to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as hot as it gets. Inside of a pressure canner, the temperature gets up a lot higher than that. The temperature is what kills the bacteria. So pressure canning is better for a lot of vegetables, particularly green beans, but it's also good for all other vegetables, including tomatoes. So whether you want to use the pressure canner or you want to use the water-based canner, the old method for your tomatoes, either one will work just fine. But now is the time to get yourself some canning tomatoes and get busy canning. If you want to learn more about it, or if you want canning tomatoes, we have an abundance of them here at Steepleview Farm, and we'd love to have you come down today and join me while I'm doing some canning and maybe pick up some tomatoes to take home and try it yourself. We certainly think that getting that fresh flavor out of the garden shouldn't be limited just to tomato season in July and August, but it ought to be something you can enjoy all year long. Well, thanks for being with me today. We certainly hope to see you again here next Saturday. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and God bless.